So Venerable Children invited some of us to reflect on the question, what do foreigners think of the United States, especially during this election season? And yesterday evening I watched the US presidential debate for the first time, and given everything that's been said about the current election climate, I have to say it wasn't so bad. Yeah, maybe I personally have very low expectations of a democratic process, just having grown up in Southeast Asia, where a lot of countries appear to be democracies, but they practice nepotism and corruption. And right now, the opposition leader of the Malaysian government is serving a 5-year jail sentence for charges of sodomy. They have been repeatedly put up against him over the years. Growing up, I still remember there was a very dramatic trial where they would get the mattress he allegedly had sex on and bring it into court and take it out of court. So now he's serving this jail sentence, and then concurrently, the current Prime Minister of Malaysia is embroiled in a corruption scandal. So, from a broader perspective of samsara, maybe what's happening in America is not so bad. That's kind of how I feel sometimes. And I wonder too if our frustration and distress, especially this election season, comes about because many of us have an idealized notion of what America stands for, what it's supposed to represent. Right? And this country has very successfully fabricated an idealized notion of America and exported it to the world. It's a global superpower with a huge media reach. Right? And because we believe in this idea of America at some level, then we react to it, either by getting attached to it, it's supposed to be this way, or we're averse to it, like, how could they disappoint us? But it's an idea, it's a fabrication, and I think it's helpful every time, for me anyway, to check up, like, what did I expect of this place? That I had grown up with watching on TV or movies or listening to music from this country or reading books about it. Just the power of American media on the world. You have to imagine that, I grew up on all this, having never visited America. I remember when I first decided to come here for college, my parents said things like, black people are very dangerous. And I said, how do you know that? I've seen them on the news. So, so just what is represented in American media is taken as the truth. And of course, after having come here, I realized that not everybody lives like on Seventh Heaven, the TV show, The real life of the day-to-day American life is quite different from what you see in Hollywood movies. So anyhow, this was the idealized notion of America I grew up with. I still remember too, in elementary school, our teacher taught us the words melting pot. And America was given as an example. And I was like, oh, how cool. This idea of many different races and religions mixing together in harmony, and this country has freedom of speech. Yeah, I just thought this was so marvelous because in Singapore, the two are seen as kind of contradictory. You have many races and religions living together, and freedom of speech is seen as a threat. If you want to speak publicly about race or religious issues, you have to apply for a permit from the police. Yeah, because it's seen that open discourse about this could create social conflict. So that's the view. So I thought, a place where you can openly express yourself and be harmonious. That's possible. I remember too, as a teenager, reading essays about American government, and what blew me away was the idea that Americans will defend the right to freedom of expression even for people you don't agree with. Like, you don't want to put them in jail because they disagree with you. It's like, people, you don't agree with them, but they have a right to express themselves. There was an essay I remember, there was a quote in there about how freedom is for the good and for the bad. And I just had to sit and think for a long time about that one, like, do I believe in that? Yeah. But anyhow, I could see that this is what, for me anyway, growing up, I thought, this is what a civil society is about, right? Where people are mature enough to recognize difference, agree to disagree, have a civil discussion, and live together. Like, you don't need to assassinate anyone, exile them, ban their work, censor them, throw them in jail, which is unfortunately what happens in many countries that do not have a democratic system of government. I will say that this very idealized idea of America changed after 9/11. That was the first time I saw, I've exaggerated my concept of this place that I've only interacted with through the media. I was really quite shocked. I was 18 at the time. I remember reading editorials in major American newspapers that said things like, we must bomb Afghanistan back to the 2nd century. And I thought, you can print something like this? I guess I thought it was a global press, and I realized, no, it represents an American perspective on the world news, right? Yeah, and I was also very shocked by the level of ignorance in some places in this country where people were attacking Sikhs because they thought they were Muslim. Growing up in Singapore, where you have both Sikhs and Muslims and the difference is very clear, it's like, okay. I guess, yeah, that's the level of ignorance for people who've not interacted with people of different cultures. And two, I was very disappointed because I thought the press would offer a more democratic, balanced perspective, and a lot of it I felt eventually was war propaganda, forcing people to take sides. Are you for the war? Are you against the war? Not looking so much at the historical roots of America's relationship with Afghanistan, why the conflict came about. Yeah. So that I found very troubling. So anyway, I still came to America for college, but with a much more sober perspective on what I thought this country was. And what I did appreciate very much about my experience at college was just the opportunity to discuss very diverse issues that can sometimes be divisive, but to see that you can have a civil discussion about race and politics. That, it's not something taboo or scary. You can have different views, criticize each other's views, and be good friends and live together harmoniously. I remember still it was the 2005 that there was an election, right? And I was so envious of all my friends. They were all having heated discussions over meals about candidates and their policies. And at the time, Singapore had been a single-party state for a very long time, and I never thought I would get to vote. So I just looked at all these people having these discussions, and I thought, you really don't know how lucky you are. You have the chance to vote. You can discuss social issues that you care about. You get to choose your own president. Don't take that for granted. Thankfully, that has changed in Singapore. I actually got to vote some years back, and it was just overwhelmingly exciting to attend political rallies. Like, wow, unthinkable. Yeah, just that experience of being engaged with other citizens in your country. I also very much appreciate that in America you have a language to talk about racial difference and inequality. That's, like I said, it's not something that I grew up with. And because you have a language, I think you can acknowledge that, you can grieve it, you can discuss it, you can think about solutions. I think the outcome in Singapore of having not much public discourse about race, especially, is that people often rely on the government to handle difference. So one example I can think of is how I think there was a case where people were posting racist comments on an internet forum, and some people got offended. And what they decided to do was to call the police. And the police tracked down the person posting those comments and found them and arrested them. And the next day, the Singapore papers published an editorial saying that this is a very sad state of affairs. These are issues that we should be able to engage and discuss at, the citizen-to-citizen level. You don't need to get the police involved in this. The fact that we have to, and it's like calling your mom and dad anytime someone calls you a name. Yeah, it's very immature. Like, look, he said this about our race. Like, and the police have better things to do than to go and catch people who are posting racist comments. Yeah. So I was glad too that the newspaper was able to take such a perspective. And too, when I worked in the Singapore government, I remember I was quite surprised and very impressed actually to see firsthand the US government use their power to push for better working conditions for low-wage migrant workers. Yeah, some people think it's none of the US business, right, to go and poke their nose in other countries and how they're treating workers. But for me anyway, I thought that often governments only pay lip service to the idea of human rights. So to meet an ambassador who I thought genuinely cared about the issues, he had talked to a lot of people on the ground, he actually knew what was happening and was pushing for reform. And it did have an effect. Of course, the US is very powerful, so the Singapore government had to sit up and really look at what the policies were and see how we were addressing the concerns being raised. I thought, wow, this is a good example of how when the American government uses its global power responsibly, it can make change around the world. So anyhow, all these institutions I was thinking, like democracy, civil society, having a civil discourse, free press, these things take such a long time to build up. Yeah, it doesn't happen overnight. It's a struggle in developing countries that are interested in these institutions to move in this direction. And sometimes when I hear about all the bad news in America, my one worry I have is that it's a step back for everybody worldwide who believes in these institutions. Because if you look at the example of America, if you believe what's in the news, then it looks like democracy results in inefficient government, right? You have people who are favoring their parties and stonewalling beneficial policies just because they want to have allegiance to a particular party. Defending civil liberties and civil rights, and seems to result in chaotic protest. Anyone can carry a gun when they feel like it and use it wherever they wish. You can say whatever you want whenever you want, right? So if these rights, I think, are exercised in this way, then it looks like the outcome of freedom is civil war or something equivalent. And my personal concern is that if all these depictions are to be believed, it makes it look like autocratic government is a better choice. In a place like Singapore, I'm not saying Singapore is autocratic, where you have a single party, there's a very strict rule of law, and disregard for human rights. I'm not talking about said country. When you have these things in place, maybe that's better for society, I mean, that's the argument, right? Like, look, it's a mess over there. They have democracy, what has it given them? May as well have a stable government and, everyone just has rice on the table and don't make noise. Which I find very disturbing if that's the kind of argument that's being made. And anyhow, so in closing, what I do want to say is that if you are American, please do not take the rights you have for granted. Don't take these institutions for granted. Many people in the world don't have the opportunity to vote. Many people can't speak their minds freely without fearing for their life. And I think in a lot of countries, colonialism and war have just destroyed community structures. It's very hard to rebuild. It's still happening slowly. So I think when Americans use this incredible freedom and power that you have to engage in hate speech or hate crimes, it's a very great tragedy. It creates the cause for the lack of freedom and to become oppressed in the future, for people to become the target of hate speech and hate crimes. So I think for the sake of our own happiness and that of others, especially Americans who have the right to vote, please go out and vote and do so wisely and responsibly.
You were saying that it was just so wonderful that people can say anything they want about race and religion and then discuss it openly. But you were also appalled at what's being said in the name of race and religion and the way it creates discord. Yeah, but you don't agree with arresting the people who do this. So are you encouraging people to be more tactful in the words they choose and how they discuss these things? What were you suggesting at the end there?
Yeah, this is something I'm still working out, and I wonder if it's because I had this very idealized notion of what freedom of speech is about, or if you experience it at college, people are having a civil discussion, right? So to see it become hate speech in public, I'm not sure what to make of. Like, I was so shocked to hear that you could defend the burning of a cross under the First Amendment. Then I was like, really? Right? Then there's a part of me that wants to keep these rights for people. Like, once you censor, once you create a law or the first practice of shutting down the freedom of expression, that's also not what I agree with. So I'm caught in this middle, right? It's like, how do you say? It's like, you can have this discourse, but politely within these parameters. Then who polices the discourse, right? Whose parameters are we following? So I can see where it can get tricky that way too.
A wise person, I don't know who it was, said that my rights end where yours begin. And so my right to free speech, I believe, does not give me the right to offend, devalue, and otherwise harm with my speech those other beings around me. So whereas it does give me the right to say my opinions, and it does give me the right to contribute to the discourse, it does not give me the right to be offensive and disrespectful to those I am engaged in a dialogue with. And how I speak.
That's quite idealized. That means when I say, I think, we tend to use words rather loosely when we're with our friends. And say, oh, so-and-so's an idiot. So we say that very readily in this country when we're around our friends, don't we? Talking about different people, yeah? But according to you, that would be infringing upon the person you're speaking about, right? Because we're devaluing them.
Well, it also has to do with the tone and the intention behind the speech. If you are bantering with a group of friends and you call them an idiot, there may not be the tone and the content and intention in that speech. But if you are using your speech to intentionally, with a tone that is harmful and disrespectful, I think that there's a problem with that. That's kind of how I would differentiate.
It's just this difficult boundary line, isn't it?
Also with political satire.
Yeah. Yep.
Which is quite common in our country, especially cartoon satires and, it's been kind of, and that, I see where you're coming from and I respect that, but what worries me about that is like the publishers in France who got killed because they were writing in a way that other people found disrespectful to their religion, so they were actually murdered. It's kind of a tough subject.
But there is a difference, if I may suggest, there's a difference between the kind of discourse that you engage in with the intention to illuminate something that is wrong or something that is not appropriate, so such as the satire, which does not have the intent to harm or to disrespect, but rather to illuminate an issue, versus the speech that is actually hateful and that you see in the blogs and that you see, in other pieces where they're actually intending to harm and disrespect. I see a difference between those two.
Yeah, we can see a difference from our side, but from the hearer's side, they find it across the board offensive. Yeah.
It's offensive to have an image of Allah.
Yeah. And just having grown up in a minority myself, it's like if anybody else says anything about your minority, it's offensive. If you use those same words to talk about yourself, that's perfectly all right. So it's a bit strange,
Oh, Venerable Losang has something.
Unfortunately, we can't always. I think it's hard to be policing or regulating what people say that someone else could take as offensive, but we need to clearly draw the line where they're suggesting or inciting actions that are going to be harmful. And we do even have slander laws, things that are unfounded, and I mean, if you slander somebody, usually there is a, when it's prosecuted, there's some kind of base, like you've hurt their ability to run a business, or there's some physical consequence that is the base of prosecuting that law. But some people get up and they're like, I hate so-and-so or these people, somebody should do this to them, And that is where I really think the hate laws should be very clear, are clear. Where the other stuff, if somebody has some warped views they have the right to believe what they want to believe, as long as they're not inciting violence towards those people or physical harmful actions.
But what about some of Trump's comments when he said that Hillary's Secret Service should not carry guns? Or at the Republican, let them see what happens. And when at the Republican convention they were chanting "lock her up," and when one of Trump's guys, what did they say? They said that people should execute her. Yeah, something. Yeah, she should be hung.
Well,
something like that.
That is illegal, actually.
Yeah.
If somebody were to do that, they could be prosecuted for that.
Why was
They're
it
inciting well, they're not being prosecuted for violence. But for him to say that they shouldn't carry guns, he's trying to make a point of what he believes that he thinks we need guns. But I don't agree with him either, but if that's his belief, how is him saying that that's not like what we should legally be drawing a line. He's responding to, well, what would you do if your security wasn't able to carry guns, you know? But to say things about harming her, that is illegal.
Mm-hmm.
I had a police officer tell me that when the time a person said something to me that they were gonna harm me, and the officer said, that'd be a felony.
Well, in some states that's assault. If you threaten to harm someone with the apparent ability to do so.
Right. Or incite somebody else to do
I think Cynthia had a.
Well, I also believe that when you have the right to speak, the right to speech, I think it's worth it not to the government intervene so much, like regulating what to say and what not to say, because in my opinion that gives criteria to the hearers. They can hear all these other alternatives or all other circumstances in how people believe. And I think that it's good for us to think and to be clear about and to take a position. For example, the country I come from, right of speech is said, but it's not done. If you do it, you're in trouble. So I prefer in that way. We don't have a criteria on many aspects. So I think in that way it's good.
Yeah, it's just interesting for me to hear the debate here and in Singapore where it's the conservatives are in power, right? It's like the example I always think of is there was a play that was going to be produced about divorce or abuse in marriage within the Muslim community. So divorce is not allowed, yeah. So that was very controversial. And it was considered offensive to the religious leaders in charge, so it was banned. Yeah, there was a huge furor around it. But if you want to talk about offense, then the religious leaders said, no, cannot. This is going to cause problems in our community. And then from the artistic side, it's like, we need to tell the story of people who are suffering. So, like that.
I want to say that in Mexico, we are trying, we have 31 states in Mexico, and I live in Mexico City, so each state has its own way to run the laws. Sometimes we have like a constitution where each state can have its own law. And we are trying to develop and create a law, and we are pushing with the senators to create a law to have like a citizen consultant, because they are taking decisions just because they want, and sometimes anyone can solve the law. So it's something that we are trying to push, and we want to be here for them, because it's insane what's happening. And obviously it's not easy. It has been a process for 2 years and we're still pushing, but it's like, why they need to take their decisions? I mean, why don't we can't or be more in the decision taking? So for us it's more like we need to organize the communities and be more organized and don't try to depend on the government all the time. Like, I don't believe in that. So that's why with this law, it's like just a trial. We are in the process. Just for our state, but I will hope in all the states will happen the same.
But in terms of parameters for speech, could people just use that freedom of speech kindly? Is that too much to ask for? I think that's it. Or with some consideration and wisdom. That's all.